Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ball Down South. Today, we're previewing the Big 12. Today, we're going to start off with John. John, tell me something about Baylor.
Baylor. Dave Aranda has done a wonderful job at Baylor. He's in year three. Year two, he won the Big 12 championship. He brings back six returning starters. The defense is going to be really good again. Um, you know, the biggest strength I think has been their defense. And at Baylor, they're going to run the football a lot. So, and, at the end of the day, I think Baylor has an opportunity to win the Big 12 again this year. Now Oklahoma is going to be in the run in Oklahoma State, but I feel like Dave Aranda has built something there. Dave Aranda's built on defense. He had that pedigree when he was at LSU, and he's brought that toughness to Baylor, and it's been proven and it's been shown off. So I'm going to go Baylor 9-3, possibly 10 wins. I think they'll win the Big 12 championship again.
Really? Okay, 9 wins. Brad?
So John's right. I mean, Dave Aranda has done a great job there. They were the Big 12 champs last year. They won the Sugar Bowl and beat Ole Miss, a 10-2 Ole Miss team in the Sugar Bowl last year. So they have their quarterback back. They actually have a wide receiver and a running back from injury that actually missed last year, and they're bringing them back to return. They have a strong offensive line. They run the ball well. They had 5.3 yards per carry last year, and they'll bring a whole lot of that offensive line back this year. They have possibly the best defensive front in the Big 12. And they bring in two more players to go with that. A transfer, Jackson Player is his name, from Tulsa. He's a defensive tackle. And they bring in Josh White, who's a linebacker from LSU. And so, their defense, they're opportunistic. They had the last 2 years, they've had 44 takeaways. So if they can keep that up and create turnovers on defense, and that's what they've been really good at. They play kind of a just up in your face, real tough, nasty defense, and they their schedule. Looking at the schedule, they play at BYU, second game of the year, and then they play away at Oklahoma, away at Texas. And other than that, they got Oklahoma State at home this year. So, I can see them going 9-3.
Okay.
That's kind of where I would put them at, is 9-3.
So, kind of restoring some good days in Baylor.
Yeah, they've done a real good job. Dave Aranda has kind of keeping. They had a good run there for a little while, and then lost it. Hired Dave Aranda, and he's turned things around pretty quick.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, John, take me out to Ames, Iowa. What's going on with Iowa State?
Iowa State is a funny team to me. They've had their ups and downs. They lose Brock Purdy, but they bring in Hunter Deckers. He studied under Purdy. At the end of the day, though, the biggest thing with Iowa State is their offensive line. Their offensive line needs to be better. They do bring back Will McDonald on the defense, probably one of the best pass rushers in the Big 12. So their defense is going to be really good. But at the end of the day, the offensive line needs to block better, and you're putting a new quarterback into the fold when Brock Purdy has been there and had that reign for so long. It's just going to be interesting to see how they incorporate the new quarterback into the fold. So I think I'm going to go 8-4, 7-5 with Iowa State. That's a good year, especially for a team like Iowa State, and Matt Campbell's done a great job, but at the end of the day, Iowa State's Iowa State, and I just don't think I don't think this year, I don't think they're built to win a Big 12 championship. Now, who's to say that they won't build it later on down the road? But I just don't see them doing much this year, but they will go bowling again.
Yeah. I mean, Purdy's a big arm to replace too. I mean, he
He
really,
really is, yeah.
yeah. So, Brad, give me something else about Iowa State.
Well, Matt Campbell's done a really a great job, I think, with Iowa State. You know, they've had 5 straight winning seasons at Iowa State. And to put that in perspective, the last time that Iowa State has had 5 straight winning seasons was 1923 to 1928. That's the last time they've had 5 straight winning seasons. You know, they've turned it around in the 90s. The whole decade of the 90s, they had 0 winning seasons at Iowa State. So, you know, Matt Campbell's done a pretty nice job there. They were 9th in the nation last year, defense. They were #1 pass defense in the Big 12 last year. Will McDonald, that John mentioned, I mean, he might be one of the nation's best pass rushers. And they have a couple more guys, Isaiah Lee and Blake Peterson, that's going to step in on that defensive line. So they have a nasty pass rush and a nasty, defensive front. And, you know, that's going to be kind of their go-to. The QB, the Hunter Deckers, he's been a backup there for 2 years. So, you know, they think that he's ready to go. They have one of the best wide receivers in the Big 12. He was a first-team All-Big 12 last year, and Xavier Hutchinson. And they have a guy that had almost 40 catches to go with him. So, you know, they're looking to have a good season. They start the season out, second game of the year against Iowa. That's going to be their, big non-conference game. They play Baylor, Oklahoma, Texas Tech, West Virginia, and Kansas State at home. And then they catch Texas, Oklahoma State on the road in the Big 12. You know, I look at them and I do believe they'll go bowling. I believe they'll wind up somewhere. I think they'll go 7-5.
Okay. 7-5. John, can you tell me about the Kansas State or Kansas Jayhawks?
Kansas. You know, I seen some improvement last year. You know, they beat Texas. And then they competed in the last 2 games of the year. They got a good quarterback in Jalen Daniels that came in late in the year and done a wonderful job. You know, they get Devin Neal back, Kai Thomas, a transfer from Minnesota, Savion Morrison from Nebraska. And Bill Connolly, I wrote this down. He ranks KU top 10 among most return in production. But at the end of the day, there's still some holes to fill on this team. Now, I'm not saying Kansas is going to go out and win 8, 9 games this year. That I'm not prophesying that. But I do think that they'll be better. And I think there's an opportunity there for Kansas to win 4 or 5 games this year. I think they're improving. I think the recruiting has gotten a little bit better. You know, you just don't beat Texas, what, 2 years? Was it 2 years in a row, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah.
And Texas is loaded with talent. And, you know, they just haven't been able to show it. But at the end of the day, I think Kansas wins 4 or 5 games this year. I think that's going to be an improvement to what they was a year ago where they went 2-10.
Yeah. 2-10 is a tough season, so definitely a big improvement. Brad, you got good news for him as well?
Yeah, I mean, last year they had a first-year head coach, Lance Leopold. He did go 2-10 in his first year. Their schedule, they play at Houston, who's a top 25 team, the second game of the year. They play Duke, who is another team that has not been very good lately, the third game of the year. So that's an interesting game between Kansas and Duke, a little football rivalry there. So little rivalry there for that game. But you look at their schedule, and they play Oklahoma and Baylor on the road. They do get Oklahoma State at home and Iowa State at home and Texas at home. So, I mean, you look at their schedule, and it's not looking all that great. But I'm going to give you – they do have 9 starters back on offense. And, Jalen Daniels did take over late for them in the year last year, and he did show some promise. And John was talking about that they beat Texas last year. Well, they also really should have beat Oklahoma last year. That game was at home, and they actually outplayed Oklahoma pretty much the entire game. And Caleb Williams, pulled one out of his hat there late in the game, and Oklahoma wound up winning, but Kansas led that game and should have won that game last year.
They should have.
They should have, but I'm going to go into this on them, okay? So their defense in the nation, in the country, they were second worst in tackles for loss. They were second worst in scoring defense. They were second worst in third down conversion. All right. That was all last year. On top of all that, they gave up 1 yard shy, 2,999 yards of rushing last year, just rushing yards. All right. So, they brought in a Miami transfer, a Purdue transfer, a Rutgers transfer that's going to be on their defense this year. So they have tried to fill some holes with some transfers. I do expect to see them be a little better than they were, than their record showed last year, 2-10. I'm gonna give them the 4 wins, and if they can get 4 wins, I think that'll be progress in the right direction for them.
Yeah, I think we all agree on that for sure. For sure. John, what about Kansas State?
Man, Kansas State. This is a team that is my wild card. Because if they can fill some holes up on the defensive side in the secondary, I think this team can be really good because they lose some guys in the back end. They got a guy by the name of Deuce Vaughn, running back, probably one of the better running backs in the country. They've had 2 8-win seasons since 2019 under Cleveland. And I like this team. I think they can win. I think they can win 9 games. They bring in Adrian Martinez. That's the big question. Can he have a better outcome than he had at Nebraska? Because his time at Nebraska was not really good. And that's a big key. And they need to fix, like I said, they need to fix some holes on the defense. But my question is, on the offensive side of the ball, protecting Martinez and taking care of him, because he's got playmakers on the outside and on the inside. So, but and I kind of want this to be a redemption tour for Adrian Martinez, because the kids had a tough time where he was at Nebraska. He's looking for a new home in Kansas State, and I just feel like that he's going to do some things this year and shock some folks. So I got Kansas State having a big year this year. I got them going 9-3. I think with the Deuce Vaughn at running back, there's a good opportunity. This team could really make some noise in the Big 12.
Okay. Brad, is 9-3 possible? What's the schedule look like?
Well, their schedule, they start out second game of the year, they play Missouri. Missouri comes to their house. So, you got an SEC team coming to their house. That's their big non-conference game. And then they play Oklahoma State, Texas at home, Texas Tech and Kansas at home. And then their away schedule, they got 5 away games in the Big 12 this year. They play Oklahoma, Iowa State, TCU, Baylor, and West Virginia. So, you're looking at their schedule, I can see several wins there, but I can also see some games that it's going to be kind of tough for them as well, even a couple of home games with Oklahoma State and Texas. John's right. Deuce Vaughn may be one of the better running backs in the Big 12, possibly challenged for one of the better running backs in the nation. He had over 1,400 yards last year, 18 TDs. They have a good wide receiver core coming back with a guy named Brooks and another guy named Knowles. They have Nebraska transfer. He was a grad transfer. Actually, he played 4 years at Nebraska, and he's coming in for his last year to try to change his, what's went on in his career a little bit. He's had some good numbers. They hadn't been able to put anything together with him at Nebraska. So, on defense last year, they were third best on D in the Big 12. They only allowed 21 points a game in the Big 12. That's actually playing pretty good defense. And they have several transfers coming in on D this year as well. So, I can see they went 8-5 last year. I can see this team. I think 9's a little too much myself, but I think they have a chance of going 8-4. This team, 8-4.
Okay. All right, John, you got to talk to me about Oklahoma Sooners. Is it doomsday for Oklahoma Sooners? Because everybody seems to be leaving them. What's going on in Oklahoma?
I believe you're going to see a brand new style of play at Oklahoma. You got Jeff Lebby, came from Ole Miss. He's the offensive coordinator now. They brought in Dylan Gabriel from UCF. They bring back 3 starting offensive linemen. There's a little bit of depth issue there, but they'll figure that out eventually. But with having Gabriel there and the weapons that they got on the outside and the inside and the wide receiver, Jeff Lebby's going to open it up. And Brent Venables, if you knew him at Clemson, he's going to play defense. And they're going to be hard-nosed. They're going to come after you. And I'll just tell Oklahoma fans this: the defense will be a lot better than they was a year ago, especially under Venables, because there's a lot of hype there. They're recruiting at a high pace. The NIL, they're going nuts in the recruiting circle. So I tell you what, I'm just going to go on a limb and I'm just going to say it. Oklahoma will probably back in the Big 12 championship.
Okay. So
I think there's just a lot of hype in Oklahoma, and I think they're going to live up to that hype. Now, it might take them a couple games to get, accustomed to the offense and the defense, but I think that Venables is going to do a good job there. I think it's going to, his first year might not be what they want, but I think down the road he's going to turn that program into what he wants it to be.
Okay. Right.
I say they go 8 wins, 9 wins. And that's a good year.
Brad, you got any good news for him?
Well, so with Oklahoma, they lost their coach in the middle of the night. They bring in Brent Venables, and he's a great defensive mind and going to be a good coach. I do believe that. And Jeff Lebby is a great offensive coordinator. Come in from Ole Miss, been with Lane Kiffin for a couple of years down there, and he's going to do a great job too. My thing with Oklahoma is this: you look over their roster, and usually Oklahoma has 3, 4, 5, 6 guys that really stand out on their roster.
Right.
Oklahoma's they had a whole lot of people transfer out when their coach left.
Yes.
When you look at their roster for Oklahoma, now I'm not saying that they're going to be trash, okay? So, I'm not saying that. But for Oklahoma, I don't think that there is those standouts on the roster that you normally would see. That's my big thing. Last year they gave up almost 400 yards a game on defense. They gave up 26 points a game. And they hardly had any pass rush at all. They definitely have to find some pass rush on defense. And don't get me wrong, I think Brent Venables will do that in time. I'm just not sure that this year the roster is as full as he would like for it to be.
Right.
They did bring in the UCF quarterback, Dylan Gabriel. But their offensive line, I kind of disagree with John a little bit on this point. Their offensive line last year gave up way too many sacks.
100%, yeah.
They gave up way too many sacks last year. They did bring in a couple of transfers into the mix on the offensive line, but they have some holes to fill on that offensive line. And even a couple of the players that come back, I mean, they just didn't gel quite like Oklahoma normally does. And they gave up way too many sacks last year. Now, their big rival game, non-conference, is Nebraska. They do go at Nebraska. Nebraska's maybe on an uptick a little bit with Scott Frost, but I still think that Oklahoma probably has the overall talent in that game. And then when you look at their schedule, they get 5 home games this year in the Big 12, and they catch Texas, Baylor, and Oklahoma State. All 3 are home games in the Big 12. Their away games are TCU, Iowa State, West Virginia, and Texas Tech.
Yeah, it's pretty favorable.
Actually, the Texas Oklahoma game is a neutral site game.
Oh, John got to be politically correct here.
Oh, I was just saying it's at the Cotton Bowl.
Okay, it's a split game. Yeah. But you get what I'm saying. They catch all these at home, and then their away schedule is not that. By looking at their schedule, I can easily see this team winning 9 games anyway, and maybe 10. If I'm sitting here looking at their schedule, I don't see them losing that many home games. I'm going to go 10-2 with this team, even though I think they are a little bit further down than what they normally would be.
Yeah. So is that doomsday in Oklahoma at all? I mean, we're talking new coaching.
10-2 is not. Now, if they go 8-4, what John said, a possible 8-4, then yeah, I think Oklahoma Sooner fans are going to be pretty upset.
Yeah.
8-4.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Oklahoma.
I did say 9 wins though. I put that in there. I thought maybe they might win 8 or 9. So.
Oh, you threw the 9 in there just to kind of.
I'm just giving it back at him.
Okay. All right. Well, John's got the whole board covered. So let's take it to Oklahoma State though. Who you got? What you got for Oklahoma State?
You want to know what's amazing about this? Coach Gundy has been there 16 years. He's never had a losing season. The man just flat out coaches, and he's a coach. He's just a flat out great coach. And they also bring back Spencer Sanders. They bring a few guys back from on the offensive line, 3 starters. They led the nation in sacks, second in team in tackles for the loss, and total defense and scoring. And they bring a bunch of those guys back. I'm just going to go on a limb here. I think it's Big 12 title or bust for Oklahoma State. I think they'll be right there again. This is a dangerous team. I like this team. I love Coach Gundy, especially his interviews. He can be a funny character at times. Actually, if you've seen today, he was doing push-ups at media day, and but at the end of the day, I think Oklahoma State will win 10 games. I think there's a chance for them to go to a big bowl, possibly Fiesta Bowl, possibly again, and get back into the mix and go to the Big 12 championship.
Yeah. See, everything you said is true, but every time the season starts, there's these high expectations, and then as the season goes on, it just kind of seems to taper off just a little. Sometimes they achieve most of them, but they're never really there in the end. They're never right there with Alabama or anybody. So I can't ever buy into them. I like them. I like everything he said. I like Coach. I like all of them, but they're just never absolutely like right there at the end. So I don't know. Give me some numbers, Brad.
All right, so Gundy's been there 18 years, but John is right. They haven't had a losing season in 16 years. I mean, he's 149-69 is his win-loss record. Gundy is. He won the Fiesta Bowl last year over Notre Dame. They were 8-1 in the Big 12 and made it to the championship game and lost to Baylor last year. They do have Spencer Sanders back. He was their QB, first team All Big 12 last year. And they do have some starters back on a very good offensive line. So, they have some pieces there. John was talking about their defense. Number 1 in sacks, second in tackles for loss. He run off a few things there. But I want to bring up that they hired the ex-Vandy coach, Derek Mason, as their defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
So they're bringing in a new defensive coordinator, but Derek Mason done a fairly decent job at Vandy. Had a down year or two there towards the end, and that's what got him. But when he started there, he took them to a bowl game 2 or 3 years in a row. Derek Mason did at Vandy, and that's not easy to do there. So they have an absolute stellar front seven on defense. Last year in the nation, they averaged over 4 sacks a game. Okay. There was only 2 teams that averaged above 3.5 sacks. Alabama was 1 and Oklahoma State. They actually led the nation in sacks. Yeah. All right. They have a guy by the last name Oliver that had 10.5 sacks. They have Tyler Lacey and Brock Martin, who combined for 12.5 sacks last year. And, they have an NFL talent guy. His name is Trace Ford, and he's back as well. They are all over the quarterback all game long. And that's where they, bring the heat on the defense. They don't have to be quite as good on the back if you can get to the quarterback often. So, I look at their schedule. They play Arizona State the second game of the year. That's kind of their big non-conference game. They do have 5 away games in the Big 12. They play Baylor and Oklahoma on the road. They play at Kansas State. And then they get Texas Tech, Texas, Iowa State, and West Virginia at home. But I'm going to be with John on this one now. They, with Texas having the last couple of years and them being down and trying to rebound this year, Oklahoma having some transfers, new coach, this is the year that Gundy needs to shoot for the Big 12. I mean, I think the fans are wanting him to shoot for the Big 12 title this year. They went 12-2 last year and had a chance at it and just missed it.
Yeah.
So
I will tell you another thing, with Oklahoma State, with Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC, there's a question now where Oklahoma could be the king of the Big 12 once they leave.
Oklahoma State,
yeah, that's another good point to look at.
Yeah, I mean, there's talk. Each conference kind of has their leader. SEC's got Alabama, Big Ten's got Ohio State. Well, the Big 12's losing Oklahoma and Texas, so there's a lot of talk of who's going to step up and be the big dog for the Big 12. And I think Oklahoma State has a shot, but they have to perform this year to be able to show that they can do that.
Yeah, well, they're playing defense in the Big 12 too, so they're playing the whole side of the ball that not everybody else is doing, especially in that conference. John, can you talk about TCU a little bit?
Sonny Dykes in, Coach Patterson out. Sonny Dykes, I'm gonna be honest with you, man. He's got his hands full this year, in my opinion. They do bring back 4 wide receivers back. The biggest issue with TCU is they was really inconsistent on offense last year, and their defense was an absolute disaster. If you look at the numbers, they allowed up 462 yards, and they gave up 35 points a game, and that's not going to win you many football games. The D's going to have to get better. The O's going to have to be more consistent. And I just think, but just by looking on paper, TCU in my opinion, was a great program. They had Andy Dalton at one point as a quarterback, led them to the Rose Bowl. So they can win down there. It's just a matter of putting it all together. But I just don't see it this year. I think they do get 6 wins though, and I think they go to a bowl game. But Sonny Dykes has got his hands full trying to maneuver things around down there, and especially coming in there on his first year.
Yeah, yeah. John or Brad, my fault.
So Sonny Dykes, this is his first year. They went 5-7 last year. TCU has been a pretty good program over the years for the last 20 plus years. The last time that TCU had back-to-back losing seasons was 1996 and 1997. And they had a losing season last year. So, they have some pieces on offense. He was talking about them not being quite as efficient on offense, but they actually were number one in the Big 12 in third down efficiency last year on offense. They had almost 200 yards a game rushing. They averaged 29 points a game last year. And Sonny Dykes is an offensive coordinator, was an offensive coordinator. He runs a high-powered offense. I do believe that the offense will be their go-to this year. John is definitely right on their defense. Their defense was an absolute disaster. They did bring in Timon Mitchell from Georgia as a transfer and a couple of other transfers on their defense, to try to shore up. It's his first year head coaches sometimes have to get some pieces in that, that they're recruiting and that they want. So, I think if they can pull off, they play Colorado at Colorado the first game of the year. They also play at SMU. So they play 2 road non-conference games, which is 2 out of the 3 that they play. And they play Oklahoma at home. And then they get Texas and Baylor away.
Okay.
I don't want to say that they'll have a losing season, but I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to pick them 5-7.
5-7. So John thinks they're going to end up in the Bahamas Bowl, and you don't think they're going to one. So, I mean, hey, that's okay. That's okay. Somebody can't go to a bowl. All right. Well, tell me about the Longhorns, John.
Well, what is there to say? Last year they couldn't tackle. Their pass protection wasn't really good. And how about you just do something? How about you just beat Kansas for once? Like, I mean, I'm just saying. I mean, they've lost to them twice. What, in the last 2 years, maybe, in 3 years? And I'm just going to be honest with you. Baylor, Iowa State, and Oklahoma State, since Charlie Strong was there, I feel like they've lapped by Texas as a program. And that's not good if you're a Texas football fan, because you should be winning games, especially, what they had with Mac Brown at one point, and they bring in Quinn Ewers, the quarterback. Bijan Robinson is probably one of the best, most athletic running backs I've ever seen. I put him in the mind of Reggie Bush, the way he makes his cuts. He's not Reggie Bush. That's not what I'm trying to say, but he has that athletic ability to break open games. But here's my thing. This is either 10 wins or a bust season for Texas. And I tell you why, because a lot of people are tired of hearing the Texas is back deal. You need to prove it on the field, because there's too much talent laying around on that field, 5-star, 4-star talent the last 3-4 years, to be not making strides, not making a bowl game. And it's time for Texas to step up and do something about it. And I believe Steve Sarkisian can do that. I just think they're just going to have to give him time, and they've gave him time. But I think with the talent that they got coming in this year, I think they got to do it this year. If they get 7-8 wins, Texas fans are going to be back on the lever again, and they're going to be wanting to pull it off.
John, You ain't going on no Longhorn podcast anytime soon, my friend. I think you just sailed that ship for yourself. Brad, tell me about those Longhorns, buddy.
Well, I mean, Steve Sarkisian's in his second year there. Last year preseason, they were all the hype. I mean, people were saying that they were in the top 10, maybe even top 5. I know they were in the top 10. They were all the hype, and they were just a bust. I mean, honestly, they were a bust. They were 100th in the country on defense last year.
100th.
100th in scoring defense. They allowed 31 points a game. They have very little pass rush. They gave up 202 yards per game rushing last year. They do bring in Quinn Ewers. He's an Ohio State 5-star coming in. They have some pieces. The Robinson running back, John is right. He's spectacular when he has the ball. The problem that he's had is he's not been able to stay healthy for a full season. That's one of the problems that he's had. They have one of the better wide receivers in the Big 12, Xavier Worthy. He's a first-team All-Big 12 last year. So they have pieces. They brought in even more than that in transfers and stuff. And Sark is recruiting like crazy. They got people on board for, the year after and stuff. So he's recruiting like crazy. The problem I have with him is it's time to put up or shut up. I mean, honestly, I was glad to see that they wasn't in the top 25, the AP poll. I was glad to see that they wasn't in there this time. So, I think it gives them something to prove.
Right.
And I think maybe that will help them out. They play Alabama the second game of the season. Alabama comes to their house. That is a huge, huge, huge game in the landscape of college football.
Oh,
I mean, you got Alabama and Texas. Two of the biggest programs, proudest programs in the nation. So that is an absolute monster of a game, the second game of the year. It's going to be a fun one to watch. It's going to be a fun one to keep track of. I can't wait for that game.
Yeah.
To be quite honest with you, it's going to be a stellar game. So that's their big game of the year, and it's at their house.
Yeah.
So, Texas fans are going to fall off a bridge if Alabama comes in there and beats them. I kind of expect that to actually happen, that Alabama does come in there and beat them. But, they play Oklahoma State away in the Big 12 this time. They get Baylor at home. And the rest of their home schedule, if they are what they say they are, they should win those games. So, looking at their schedule, I can see this team, I think this team will wind up going 8-4. That's what I'm going to say.
Okay.
Well, I'll just tell you, if that happens, there's not going to be a party in Austin.
Oh, there ain't. I tell you what, man. You can tune in to see that Alabama-Texas game on the live stream too. So we'll be watching it here.
It'll be one fun game to watch.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, tell me about Texas Tech, John.
Man, there's some young talent coaching in this group. You got Zach Kitley or Kitley, however you say it. He's the OC. He studied under Cliff Kingsbury. I think they're going to open up this offense a little bit. They got the head coach Joy McGuire. They brought back a lot of skill position players. The biggest thing with them is their O-line holes. They need to fix some things on the O-line, but their recruiting has been solid. There's a lot of things that you like at Texas Tech. Even when Mike Leach was there, you seen how they opened up the offense with Graham Harold and how I even think they beat Texas. I think Texas one year on a last second play. So, there's chances to win at Texas Tech, and I think Joy McGuire is going to do a good job there. They brought in the DC, the guy Reuter from Oregon. I think he'll be a really good fit for that defense because the defense needs a little work. But I could see Texas Tech winning 7, 8 games. I mean, they're one of them teams that are scrappy. And I think at the end of the day, they're a team on the schedule that you just don't want to see, especially if you're in a trap game type situation.
Yeah.
So I think they'll win 7, 8 games. I think they're building something solid and love it.
Okay. Young coach is building something solid. See how it grows. Brad, tell me something about him.
So they have a first year head coach, Joey McGuire, but he is bringing in some awfully stellar, high powered offensive guys. Their OC was at Houston Baptist 2 years ago. Last year he was at Western Kentucky University. They had 535 yards a game and 44 points a game last year. And their quarterback is now in the NFL. This Western's quarterback was, and they are bringing in one high-powered offense, and I fully expect them to keep their foot on the pedal, to be quite honest with you. Now, defense, they brought in Vandy linebacker Dimitri Moore. I know he's not a stud name that many people are going to know, but he played 3 years at Vandy and had over almost 240 tackles in the SEC. He's a solid linebacker for them to kind of shore up a little bit on the defensive side of the ball for them. My biggest problem with Texas Tech is looking at their schedule. Second game of the year, they got to play Houston, who's in the top 25. Houston is probably one of the 2 or 3 non-Power 5 teams that everybody's talking about. And then this third game of the year, they play at NC State. And we've already talked about NC State and talked about some of the high-powered position that we think they're going to be in. And, that's 2 of their 3 non-conference games. And then they play Texas, Baylor, and Oklahoma at home this year. They do get those teams at home, but they have those 3 games. They play Iowa State and Oklahoma State and Kansas State on the road. I like the looks of this when I see it. I just don't really like their schedule. And because of that, and a first-year head coach and trying to get their offense going like they want to get it going, I'm actually going to pick them to miss a bowl and go 5-7.
Tough. All right. Tough. All right, John. Tell me about them boys down there in Morgantown.
Neil Brown, former Kentucky disciple. He's, I think, 17 and 18 since he's been there, and he's 11 and 15 in the Big 12 the last 3 years. That's not real good, but he did bring in OC Graham Harrell, I was just talking about, from Texas Tech, who played at Texas Tech. They bring in JT Daniels, former Georgia quarterback. They bring back Bryce Ford Wheaton, Sam James. They got some offensive line. They got some veterans on the line. I think you'll see the offense open up a little bit this year. When they got Dante Steels, he's probably one of the best pass rushers in the country. The biggest thing was West Virginia is the tackles for loss situation. They was really bad last year, and they only had 13 takeaways last year. That's not going to win you many football games.
Mm-hmm.
And you look down the road here. I'm just going to just bear with me. Their schedule: at Pitt, at Virginia Tech, at Texas Tech, at Iowa State, and at Oklahoma State. Where's those wins going to come from?
I don't know. You tell me.
I just that's a rough slate of away games.
Right.
Especially like we just talked about Texas Tech, they're growing. And, at the same time, West Virginia hasn't been the West Virginia that was there when Steve Slayton and Pat White was running around on the football field. So I don't know. I think they'll win 6 games at the most. I just don't see them doing much in terms of, you know, top tier bowl. I think they'll go to a small bowl. And I don't know if Neil Brown even keeps a job if that happens. Like that's, I mean, he's not done real good since he's went to the Big 12,
Yeah, yeah, they'll tear your house down in Morgantown for sure. No joke. Brad.
especially football season because they're
Oh, yeah.
pretty.
Yeah, so Neil Brown, I mean, he's right. He hasn't performed quite like they thought he would be, that he would. But he did bring in Graham Harrell. Graham Harrell spent time. He was at Texas Tech quarterback, and he spent time at USC the last few years as their offensive coordinator. And USC has had some trouble, but they haven't had trouble on the offensive side. They've scored a lot of points. They just couldn't really stop anybody, and that's what USC's problem was. So, and then out of coincidence, they also JT Daniels, who is coming from Georgia, actually signed and played for Graham Harrell at USC. That's where he originally signed, and he had a knee injury. And after the knee injury, he got beat out and he went to Georgia. That's where JT Daniels started from. But on the offensive side of the ball with Harold and JT Daniels, they have two pass catchers that had 40 plus catches apiece and over 500 yards. They have those two guys back. So, with JT Daniels and Graham Harrell and some receivers and a decent offensive line back, I expect to see their offense do something a lot more this year than what they did last year. Their defense, however, it's a guessing game, to be honest with you. They have about 6 to 8 guys that are transfers that are probably going to be either starters or high on the depth chart, on the defense. So it's really hard to, they have 2 or 3 of them they think is going to come in and be stellar, but it's kind of hard to, you don't never know how those type of players are going to mesh when you are, when you got 8 guys coming in on the defense side of the ball, you don't really know. They have a linebacker by the name of Jasir Cox that's coming back. He's going to have to be a leader to try to get some guys together,
Yeah.
One thing I want to mention about the Pitt game, it's very interesting to me. So I said JT Daniels got beat out at USC. The guy who beat him out has now transferred to Pitt. All right. So what's interesting is the first game of the season, you're going to have both quarterbacks, the quarterback from Pitt and JT Daniels from West Virginia, on the field, both competing and playing 1 for and 1 against their former offensive coordinator. Right. The very first game of the season. Keaton Slovis is the Pittsburgh quarterback, and he actually is the one that took over for JT Daniels when he got injured for USC. So it's just interesting that they are both transferred out, and now the first game of the year they play against each other. That game is at Pitt. It's pretty much a rivalry game between the two schools.
Yeah.
And again, that game should be fun to keep up with and watch as well. I'm actually looking forward to that game.
Yeah.
I think with all those twists and ties in that game, that it should be a fun game. Now, for the season, I think there's a chance. I'm going to pick them. They do have a tough schedule playing at Pitt and at Virginia Tech. But they get Baylor, Oklahoma at home. They play Kansas, TCU, and Kansas State at home. And then the 2 tough away games would be Texas and Oklahoma State. Iowa State won't be an easy game as well. But I can see this team actually going 7-5. If they go 7-5 and get to a decent bowl at 7-5, I think Neil Brown will stay. If they don't, and they go 6-6, barely scrape by or miss a bowl, then I fully expect Neil Brown to not be there next year.
Man, every week you all are trying to start the coaching carousel. I'm telling you.
You gotta win in this business, brother.
Oh yeah, for sure. You don't
4
stay
years.
so long.
This will be 4 years for Neil Brown. Most coaches, I mean, you got to perform after 4 years.
Yeah, understand. All right. Well, this has been our Big 12 preview, and that's gonna do it for us here. Like, share, comment, everything else. Talk to y'all later.